My name is Angelina Sterling, and despite building a multi-million-dollar portfolio before 30, I was never good enough for my husband's family. But that Thanksgiving night, when they humiliated me in front of 40 guests, everything changed forever. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, I should start by telling you about the life I built for myself. At 28, I was a senior portfolio manager at Meridian Wealth Management in Charlottesville, Virginia, one of the most exclusive investment firms on the East Coast. My corner office overlooked the Blue Ridge Mountains. And my annual bonus alone was more than most people's salaries. But none of that mattered to the Blackwood family. My husband Marcus and I had been married for 3 years. When this story takes place, we'd met at the University of Virginia. Him studying literature, me pursuing my MBA in finance. He was everything I thought I wanted. Intelligent, kind, from what appeared to be a loving family. The Blackwoods owned Blackwood Vineyards, a prestigious winery that had been in their family for 4 generations, but from the moment Marcus brought me home to meet them, I could feel the chill. His mother, Patricia Blackwood, was a woman who wore her heritage like armor. She'd introduced me as Marcus's friend from school even after we were engaged. His father, William, would ask pointed questions about my little investment hobby, as if managing hundreds of millions in assets was something I did to pass time. The worst part? They treated their vineyard like it was Downton Abbey, and I was the help who'd gotten too comfortable. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 300 acres of prime Virginia wine country. Their main house was a colonial mansion with white columns and manicured gardens that belonged in Southern Living magazine. Every Sunday, the extended family would gather for dinner. Marcus's parents, his brother Jonathan and his wife Chelsea, his sister Rebecca, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins who all worked in different aspects of the family business. I was never included in these business discussions while they planned harvests, marketing strategies, and expansion projects. I'd be relegated to helping Chelsea set the table or listening to Rebecca complain about her art gallery in Richmond. They treated me like I was decoration, pretty enough to look at, but certainly not smart enough to contribute anything meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on me. During the week, I was making investment decisions that could make or lose millions. I was consulting with Fortune 500 CEOs and managing portfolios for some of Virginia's wealthiest families. But on Sundays, I wasn't trusted to discuss grape varieties or bottle designs. Marcus, to his credit, tried to bridge the gap. He'd mention my successes, how I'd helped a client secure a particularly lucrative merger, or how my market predictions had saved another client from significant losses during a downturn. But his family would nod politely and change the subject. Back to wine, weather, or anything else that didn't involve acknowledging my professional existence. Things started getting worse in our second year of marriage. Marcus had been working at a small literary magazine in town, making barely $30,000 a year. It was his passion, and I respected that. But it meant I was carrying most of our financial responsibilities. I paid our mortgage, our car payments, our vacation expenses, everything. I didn't mind. Love means supporting each other's dreams, right? But the Blackwoods saw it differently. I overheard Patricia talking to her sister at a family barbecue, describing me as that career woman who has poor Marcus under her thumb. She worried out loud that I was emasculating her son by earning more money when Marcus wasn't around. William would make jokes about how I was probably just waiting for Marcus to inherit his share of the vineyards so I could cash out. The comments stung because they revealed what the family really thought of me. I wasn't a successful professional who loved their son. I was a gold digger with a convenient job, biding my time until I could get my hands on their family wealth. The fact that I made more in a month than Marcus made in a year seemed to escape their logic entirely. Chelsea, Jonathan's wife, was the worst. She'd been born into old Richmond money and had never worked a day in her life. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how exhausting it must be to always be focused on making money. How she couldn't. Imagine choosing career over family. The implication was clear. Real women didn't need to work. Real women supported their husbands and raised children and organized charity galas. I was not a real woman by Blackwood standards, In early November, Marcus came home with news that would change the trajectory of our story. The vineyard was in trouble. A combination of bad weather, supply chain issues, and increased competition had put them in a difficult financial position. They were looking at having to take out a significant loan against the property to stay afloat. Dad's been losing sleep over it, Marcus told me as we sat in our kitchen. He's too proud to ask for help, but I can see how worried he is, Jonathan. Suggested they might need to sell off some of the land. I saw an opportunity, not to profit off their struggles, but to finally prove my worth to this family. I'd been watching the Virginia wine industry for years, and I knew the Blackwood vineyard had tremendous potential. Their location was perfect, their heritage was valuable, and their wine was actually quite good. They just needed better financial management and strategic investment. What if I could help? I asked Marcus. He looked at me skeptically. Help how? I could put together an investment proposal. I have clients who are always looking for alternative investments. Wine is actually a growing sector. Especially with the right guidance, I could potentially help them secure funding without having to give up any land or control. Marcus's eyes lit up. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked at me like I might be the solution rather than the problem. But when he brought my offer to his family, their response was predictably dismissive. William actually laughed. Tell Vivian we appreciate the thought, but this is a family business. We'll handle our problems ourselves. The message was clear. I wasn't family, not really. Despite their rejection of my help, the Blackwoods still expected me to show up for their annual Thanksgiving celebration. This wasn't just a family dinner. It was a full production. Patricia invited extended family, business associates, and friends from their country club. It was their chance to show off their beautiful home, their successful vineyard, and their perfect family traditions. This year felt different, though. I could sense tension in the weeks leading up to it. Marcus was stressed about the vineyard's financial situation. Patricia seemed more critical than usual, making pointed comments about my work schedule and how I was never around for family events. This despite the fact that I attended every single gathering they invited me to. The day before Thanksgiving, Chelsea called to ask if I could help with preparations. We need someone to polish silver and help with place settings, she said, as if I were the hired help. When I mentioned I had a conference call with a client in Tokyo, she sighed dramatically. Of course, career first, as always. I should have seen it coming. But love makes you hopeful, sometimes foolishly so. Thanksgiving dinner at the Blackwood estate was always an elaborate affair, but this year they'd outdone themselves. The dining room table seated 24, set with Patricia's grandmother's china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. The guest list included 2 local politicians, a food critic from Richmond, and several other prominent families from the area. I'd spent the morning helping in the kitchen, despite my designer dress. A beautiful burgundy silk piece that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Patricia had made several comments about my impractical outfit, but I'd learned to ignore her jabs during cocktail hour. I mingled politely, discussing market trends with William's business partner and sharing travel stories with one of Patricia's friends. I was good at these events, actually. My job required similar social skills, and I could hold my own in any conversation about business, politics, or culture, but I noticed the whispers. Little conversations that stopped when I approached, glances that felt more loaded than usual. Something was building. I couldn't quite put my finger on what. When we sat down for dinner, I was placed at the far end of the table, separated from Marcus by at least 8 people. This wasn't unusual. Patricia always arranged seating to maximize conversation among her important guests. I was typically placed with the other wives, expected to discuss children, decorating, and charity work. The meal progressed normally. For the first hour, the turkey was perfect. The wine flowed freely, and conversation buzzed around topics ranging from Virginia politics to holiday travel plans. I found myself actually enjoying the evening, thinking maybe I'd been paranoid about the earlier tension. Then William stood up to make his annual Thanksgiving speech. William Blackwood was a man who loved the sound of his own voice. Every family gathering included at least one lengthy speech about tradition, gratitude, and the importance of family values. This year, he seemed particularly animated as he raised his wine glass. Friends, family, and honored guests, he began, his voice carrying easily across the dining room. This Thanksgiving, I find myself reflecting more than usual on the true meaning of family and tradition. The guests settled in, expecting the usual platitudes about harvest blessings and family heritage, but William's tone had an edge I hadn't heard before. The Blackwood family has worked this land for over a century, he continued. We've built something that lasts, something real, something that can't be bought or sold or traded like some commodity on the stock market. My stomach began to tighten. Several guests glanced in my direction, and I saw Patricia suppress what looked like a smile. We believe in earning your place at this table. William's voice grew stronger. We believe in contribution, in building something with your own hands and being part of something larger than yourself. Marcus was looking down at his plate, his face flushed. I could see his jaw clenched from across the table, which is why, William continued, we have a strict policy in this family. No freeloaders allowed. The word hit the room like a slap. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. William wasn't finished. We've worked too hard to build what we have to support those who think they can just marry into it. This family, this business, this land. It's for people who understand the value of real work, not pushing money around on paper. I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me. The local politician's wife looked uncomfortable. The food critics seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding. Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction. So, here's to family. William raised his glass higher. Real family. People who've earned their place at our table. The toast that followed was the most humiliating moment of my life. 24 people raised their glasses while I sat frozen, publicly branded as a freeloader who'd married into money I hadn't earned. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I, who had been supporting their son financially for years, was being accused of being a gold digger in front of their closest friends and business associates. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the table. I saw apology there, shame, but also resignation. He raised his glass with the others. That's when something inside me broke. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. And it's not how I was raised. My mother taught me that dignity means controlling your response when others lose control of theirs. So I placed my napkin carefully beside my plate, stood slowly, and walked out of that dining room with my head high. Behind me, I heard Patricia say something about thin skin and nervous laughter from some of the guests. I heard William call after me, asking if I was feeling all right, but I didn't turn around. Marcus found me in the foyer. Grabbing my coat from the closet, Angelina, wait, he said, his voice pleading. Dad didn't mean. Yes, he did, I said quietly. And you let him, it's just, things are so stressful right now with the business. He's not thinking clearly. I turned to face my husband, this man I'd loved enough to endure years of subtle insults and dismissive treatment. Marcus, I offered to help with the business. I offered to use my connections, my expertise, my resources. To save this place, your father laughed at me. And tonight, he called me a freeloader in front of 24 people while you sat there and said nothing. I know, but if I'd said something, it would have just made things worse. Worse. For whom? He couldn't answer that. We both knew the truth. It would have been worse for him. Standing up for me would have meant conflict with his family. And Marcus had spent his entire life avoiding conflict with the Blackwoods. I'll talk to him, he said finally. I'll make him apologize. Don't, I said, opening the front door. I'm done with apologies that don't mean anything. I drove home that night in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But it wasn't humiliation I was feeling anymore. It was clarity. The weekend after Thanksgiving. While Marcus slept off his hangover and guilt, I did what I do best. I researched. If the Blackwood family thought I was just some money-pushing paper dealer who didn't understand real work, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Started with public records, property taxes, business filings, loan documents, anything that would give me a clear picture of the vineyard's actual financial situation. What I found was worse than I'd expected, The Blackwood vineyard wasn't. Just in trouble. It was on the verge of collapse. They owed over $2 million to various creditors. Their property taxes were 6 months behind. The bank had already begun preliminary foreclosure proceedings, though they'd managed to keep it quiet so far. But here's what really caught my attention: the timeline. These financial problems hadn't started recently with bad weather or supply chain issues. They'd been building for over 5 years. Williams' mismanagement, combined with Jonathan's expensive lifestyle and Rebecca's failing art gallery that they'd been subsidizing, had slowly drained the business dry. The worst part? They'd been borrowing against the property repeatedly, taking out equity loans to cover operating expenses instead of addressing the underlying problems. It was exactly the kind of financial mismanagement I helped my clients avoid every single day. I spent the entire weekend building a complete financial picture of their situation. By Sunday night, I knew more about the Blackwood family's money problems than they did. Monday morning, I was back in my office with a new perspective on everything. My assistant, Jennifer, commented that I seemed unusually focused during our morning briefing. She was right. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about family dinners or in-law approval. I was thinking about justice. I called my private banker, David Chun. At First National, David and I had worked together for years, and he'd helped facilitate some of my largest client transactions. More importantly, he was discreet and efficient. I need information about a potential acquisition, I told him. A vineyard property in Charlottesville that may be facing foreclosure. Residential or commercial acquisition? Personal interest, I said, and David? I need this handled with complete confidentiality. Within 2 days, David had confirmed what my research had suggested. The Blackwood vineyard would be going to foreclosure auction within 60 days unless they could come up with $23 million to satisfy their outstanding debts. The bank had been patient, probably because of the family's local reputation. But patience has limits when payments stop coming. More interesting was what David discovered about their other assets. William's personal property was heavily mortgaged. Jonathan and Chelsea's house in Richmond was underwater. Rebecca's gallery was losing money every month. The family that had spent years portraying themselves as successful Virginia aristocrats was actually drowning in debt. That's when I knew what I was going to do. I'd built my career on understanding that information is power, but timing is everything. I couldn't just swoop in and buy the vineyard outright. That would look like exactly the kind of aggressive takeover they'd accused me of planning. Instead, I needed to be more strategic. First, I established a shell company, Sterling Acquisitions, LLC. It was perfectly legal and completely anonymous. Registered in Delaware with David's law firm handling the paperwork, Sterling Acquisitions would be my vehicle for purchasing the Blackwood debt. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. When properties go into foreclosure, the debt often gets sold to investment companies at a discount. Banks don't want to own vineyards. They want their money back, so they sell the debt to companies like mine, who then either collect from the borrower or foreclose and sell the property. I instructed David to approach Blackwood's primary lender, Virginia Commerce Bank, about purchasing their debt package, not foreclosing. Purchasing, Sterling Acquisitions would pay the bank the full amount owed, plus fees. In exchange for assuming the debt and all rights to collect, the bank was thrilled. Instead of dealing with a messy foreclosure and uncertain recovery, they'd get paid in full immediately. They agreed to the transaction within a week. By mid-December, Sterling Acquisitions owned every penny of debt secured by Blackwood vineyard property. And the Blackwoods had no idea. The month between Thanksgiving and Christmas was tense in our household. Marcus knew I was still angry, but he didn't understand that my anger had evolved into something much more focused. He kept trying to make peace, suggesting we spend Christmas somewhere else, offering to have serious conversations with his family, even proposing we start our own traditions. But I insisted we attend the Blackwood Christmas Eve celebration as planned. Are you sure? He asked. After what happened at Thanksgiving. I'm sure, I said. It's important to me that we're there. What I didn't tell him was that Sterling Acquisitions had sent the Blackwood family their first official notice the week before. They now knew their debt had been sold, and they'd been given 30 days to either pay the full amount or begin negotiations with their new creditor. They didn't yet know who that creditor was. Patricia had called the house twice, trying to reach me. She'd left messages about family obligations and putting unpleasantness behind us. The desperation in her voice told me they were starting to panic. Christmas shopping that year was particularly satisfying. I bought thoughtful, expensive gifts for everyone. Marcus's parents, his siblings, even the extended family members who'd witnessed my Thanksgiving humiliation. I wanted them to remember my generosity later. The Blackwood Christmas Eve party was smaller than Thanksgiving. Just immediate family and a few close friends. The house was beautifully decorated, as always, but I noticed signs of stress that others might have missed. The wine selection wasn't as extensive as previous years. Patricia's dress, while lovely, was one I'd seen before. Small economies that suggested money was getting tight. William looked older, more tired. He'd been dealing with lawyers and accountants for weeks, trying to understand how their family business had suddenly been sold to an unknown investment company. The bank claimed they had no information about Sterling acquisitions, beyond a Delaware address and a very efficient attorney. Vivian, Patricia greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm so glad you decided to join us. Of course, I replied warmly. It's Christmas Eve, family time. The word family hung in the air for just a moment, too. Long dinner was elegant but subdued. Jonathan looked like he hadn't slept in days. Rebecca kept checking her phone, probably monitoring her failing gallery's social media engagement. Chelsea made brittle conversation about holiday shopping and vacation plans that everyone knew they couldn't afford. Marcus kept glancing at me, nervously, probably wondering why I was being so pleasant after weeks of cold silence. After dinner, we moved to the living room for gift exchange. This was always a formal affair, with Patricia orchestrating the order and everyone taking turns, opening presents while others watched. I waited until everyone else had gone first. I have something special for the whole family, I announced, standing beside the magnificent Christmas tree that dominated one corner of the living room. I pulled out an envelope, expensive paper, my monogram embossed in gold. This has been such a difficult year for everyone. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. The vineyard facing challenges, all the stress about the future. I wanted to do something meaningful. William and Patricia exchanged glances. They probably thought I was about to offer the same business help they'd rejected before. So I've taken care of everything, I continued, holding up the envelope. The debt, the foreclosure proceedings, all of it, consider it my Christmas gift. To the family, the silence that followed was profound. William's face went white. Jonathan actually dropped his wine glass, the crystal shattering on the hardwood floor. What do you mean? Patricia whispered. I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents David had prepared. Sterling Acquisitions purchased your debt from Virginia Commerce Bank 3 weeks ago. All $23 million of it. Merry Christmas. The reality hit them in waves. First confusion, then recognition, then the full implications of what I'd done. You, William could barely form words. You bought our debt? Every penny, I confirmed. The vineyard, your personal mortgage, even Rebecca's gallery loans, Sterling Acquisitions, my company, now holds all of it. Marcus was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Vivian, what are you doing? I'm solving the family's problems, I said simply, just like I offered to do before Thanksgiving. The documents I handed William weren't foreclosure notices. They were much more interesting than that. This is a debt forgiveness agreement, I explained as he fumbled with the papers. Sterling Acquisitions is prepared to forgive the entire debt, all $23 million, in exchange for a simple acknowledgement. What kind of acknowledgement? Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper, an acknowledgement that I'm a competent financial professional who has contributed significantly to this family's welfare, and a formal apology for the public humiliation I endured at Thanksgiving. Dinner. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You're holding our home hostage, Jonathan said finally, his voice shaking with rage. I'm offering to save your home, I corrected. Without this agreement, Sterling Acquisitions will foreclose within 30 days. The property will be auctioned, and whatever it sells for will be applied to your debt. Given the current market and the vineyard's financial reputation, you'll probably still owe several $100,000 after the sale. William was reading through the documents, his face growing redder with each page. This is extortion. This is business, I said calmly. The same kind of business you told me I didn't understand. The same pushing money around on paper that you dismissed as not real work. Chelsea started crying. How could you do this to us? I'm not doing anything to you, I replied. I'm offering to save you. All you have to do is admit that the woman you called a freeloader just forgave a $23 million debt. For several minutes, no one spoke. William kept reading and rereading the documents, probably looking for some loophole or trick. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, her carefully composed facade finally cracking. Marcus looked back and forth between his family and me, clearly trying to process what was happening. You planned this, he said finally. The whole time. Since Thanksgiving, you've been planning this. I've been solving this. I corrected. Your family was 60 days away from losing everything. Now they have a choice. Some choice, Rebecca muttered. Humiliate ourselves or lose our home. You had no problem humiliating me in front of a room full of people, I reminded her. This is just a private family conversation. William finally set down the papers and looked directly at me. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed to really see me not as his son's inconvenient wife, but as the woman who held his family's future in her hands. If we sign this, he said slowly, the debt is really forgiven, all of it? Every penny. Sterling Acquisitions will transfer the property titles back to the family. Clear of all liens, you'll own everything free and clear. And if we don't? I didn't need to answer. They all knew what foreclosure meant. Patricia was the first to break. How did you even get this money? She asked. I earned it, I said simply. The same way I've been earning money for years while you assumed I was just lucky or scheming. I built my own investment portfolio. I made smart decisions with my own money, and I used my professional relationships to make this transaction happen. $23 million, Jonathan said, his voice hollow. You just had $23 million. I had access to it? Yes, along with the knowledge and connections to make it work. I looked around the room at each of their faces. All things you dismissed as not real work. The negotiation took another hour. William wanted the language softened, the acknowledgement made less specific. Patricia suggested we could all just move forward, without formal apologies. Jonathan even tried to argue that they could fight the debt transfer in court, but I'd done my homework. The debt transfer was completely legal, properly documented, and absolutely binding. Sterling Acquisitions had every right to foreclose, and we all knew they couldn't win a legal battle they couldn't afford to fight. In the end, it came down to pride versus survival. William signed first. His signature was shaky, but it was there on the line, acknowledging that I had demonstrated exceptional financial acumen and family loyalty in resolving the Blackwood family's business difficulties. Patricia's apology was harder to extract, but eventually she signed a statement admitting that her Thanksgiving comments had been inappropriate and hurtful to a valued family member. Jonathan and Rebecca signed as well, their acknowledgments. Briefer but still legally binding. Marcus was the last holdout. This isn't how marriage is supposed to work, he said. Neither is letting your family publicly humiliate your wife. I replied, but here we are, he signed. The next morning, Christmas Day, David Chun worked his magic one more time. By noon, all the debt forgiveness paperwork had been filed. The property liens had been released, and the Blackwood family owned their vineyard free and clear for the first time in over a decade. I had copies of everything delivered to the estate that afternoon, along with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a note that read, "To new beginnings and mutual respect. Angelina, the total cost of my revenge had been $2,347,000, not counting legal fees and transaction costs. It was a significant portion of my available assets, but not enough to impact my lifestyle or financial security. I'd spent more on some single investments for clients, But the return on investment was priceless. The week between Christmas and New Year's was surreal. Marcus alternated between awe and concern, trying to understand how his wife had quietly orchestrated the salvation of his family's legacy while simultaneously demonstrating her complete financial dominance over all of them. "I keep thinking about what you said," he told me one evening as we sat by our fireplace, "about how I let them humiliate you." "You did," I said simply. "I was scared," he admitted. "I've never been able to stand up to my father, not once in my entire life." "I know, but you did. You found a way to make him acknowledge who you really are." I considered this. I found a way to make it impossible for him to pretend otherwise. Word spread quickly through Virginia's wine community about the Blackwood family's mysterious debt resolution. Several people asked me about it directly, knowing my profession. I simply said I was glad they'd found a solution. Patricia called twice to thank me, her voice stiff with uncomfortable gratitude. William sent a formal thank you note, typed on business letterhead, acknowledging my professional assistance with family financial matters. But the real change was in how they treated me. At the New Year's Eve party they hosted, smaller than usual but still elegant, I was included in every conversation about the vineyard's future. They asked my opinion on business decisions. They introduced me to guests as Marcus's wife who works in finance, instead of avoiding the topic entirely. 3 months later, I was officially consulting for Blackwood Vineyards. William had swallowed his pride enough to ask for my help developing a 5-year business plan that would ensure they never faced foreclosure again. My fee was modest, but my involvement was comprehensive. The vineyard started turning a profit within 6 months. I helped them restructure their debt, improve their cash flow management, and develop new revenue streams through wine tourism and event hosting. Jonathan stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on marketing, which suited his skills. Better, Rebecca closed her failing gallery and started managing the vineyard's event bookings. But more than the business success, what changed was respect. They listened when I spoke. They valued my opinions. They included me not just as Marcus's wife, but as a professional whose expertise had literally saved their family legacy. The Thanksgiving after my revenge, William's toast was very different. He spoke about gratitude, about the unexpected sources of blessing, and about the importance of recognizing worth in all its forms. He looked directly at me when he mentioned being grateful for family members who step up when it matters most. This time, when everyone raised their glasses, I raised mine too. My relationship with Marcus evolved as well, though it took time and considerable conversation. The fact that I had been capable of orchestrating something so complex and decisive, all while he'd been feeling sorry for himself about his family's financial problems, forced him to see me differently. "I married someone I didn't really know," he told me one evening about 6 months after that Christmas Eve revelation. "You married the person I've always been," I corrected. "You just chose not to see it." "I was intimidated," he admitted, "by your success, your confidence, your ability to handle things I couldn't even understand. It was easier to let my family diminish you than to admit I felt inadequate." It wasn't a complete transformation overnight. Marcus had spent 30 years deferring to his family's judgment, and learning to prioritize his wife's dignity took practice, but he was trying, and that meant something. More importantly, he started building his own career independence. He left the literary magazine and began freelance writing, specializing in profiles of Virginia's agricultural businesses. His first major piece was about the turnaround at Blackwood Vineyards, though he didn't mention my role beyond describing me as a financial consultant who helped develop the recovery strategy. Looking back now, 2 years later, I sometimes wonder if I went too far. $23 million is a lot of money to spend on making a point, even when you can afford it. But then I remember that Thanksgiving night, the humiliation, the dismissal, the complete lack of respect for everything I'd achieved. And I know I'd do it again. The Blackwood family learned that their freeloader daughter-in-law was actually their salvation. They learned that pushing money around on paper required skills they didn't possess and knowledge they desperately needed. Most importantly, they learned that treating people badly has consequences, even when those people love you enough to forgive you. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about forcing them to see me clearly, perhaps for the first time. And once they saw me, really saw me, they had to acknowledge what had always been true. I wasn't the problem in this family. I was the solution. The vineyard is thriving now. Last year, they won their first major wine competition award in over a decade. The property values have recovered, and they're even considering expanding into the adjacent parcels that became available when another local winery went out of business. William often introduces me to business associates as the financial expert who turned our operation around. He's never directly acknowledged what really happened that Christmas Eve, but he doesn't need to. We both know who saved whom. Patricia and I have developed something approaching friendship. We'll never be close, but she includes me in family, planning decisions, and asks my opinion on matters ranging from business strategy to her grandchildren's education funds. The respect is real, even if it was purchased with $23 million and some very sophisticated financial maneuvering. Chelsea has started asking me for investment advice. Rebecca wants to know if I think she should go back to school for a business degree. Even Jonathan, who was the most resentful about my Christmas Eve revelation, now runs his marketing ideas by me before implementing them. They learned a valuable lesson. The quiet woman at the end of the table might be the most powerful person in the room. If there's a moral to this story, it's about the difference between proving your worth and demonstrating it. For years, I tried to prove my value to the Blackwood family through small gestures, bringing expensive wine, helping with dinner preparations, listening politely to their dismissive comments. I thought if I was patient enough, generous enough, accomplished enough, they would eventually recognize my contributions. But some people will never see what they don't want to see. Some people will always diminish others to make themselves feel more important. With those people, proof isn't enough. You need demonstration. My demonstration was financial, because that was the language they understood. I showed them their vulnerability, and then showed them my power to either destroy or save them. The choice to save them, that was my revenge. It forced them to live with the knowledge that everything they had, they owed to the woman they dismissed as worthless. Word of what happened at the Blackwood vineyard spread through Virginia's business community. Though the details remained private, other families in similar situations began reaching out to me, looking for financial consulting services. I accidentally created a niche market helping legacy businesses navigate debt crises and family dynamics. My reputation at Meridian Wealth Management also evolved. Senior partners who'd seen me as simply a talented portfolio manager began recognizing my skills in crisis resolution and strategic planning. Within a year, I was promoted to vice president and given my own team specializing in family business consulting. The irony wasn't lost on me that the Blackwoods' attempt to diminish my professional credibility had actually enhanced it. Their crisis became my expertise, and their salvation became my success story. Marcus started telling people about his wife's business acumen with genuine pride instead of defensive explanations. He'd learned the difference between feeling threatened by my success and feeling proud of it. Our marriage became stronger once he stopped trying to make himself feel bigger by making me seem smaller. The following Thanksgiving was held at our house for the first time. It was my suggestion, and surprisingly, the family agreed. Patricia helped with cooking, asking for my recipes and complimenting my hosting skills. William carved the turkey and made a toast about new traditions and old gratitudes. The conversation was different too. Instead of talking around me about vineyard business, they included me in strategic discussions about expansion opportunities and market positioning. Rebecca asked my opinion about launching an online wine club. Jonathan wanted my thoughts on their social media marketing budget. But the most meaningful moment came when Patricia pulled me aside while we were cleaning dishes. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Not the one I signed at Christmas, a real one." I waited. "I was threatened by you from the beginning," she admitted. "You were everything I wasn't successful. Independent, confident in ways I'd never learned to be. Instead of admiring that, I tried to diminish it. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to Marcus." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "What you did, buying our debt, saving the vineyard, it was brilliant, ruthless, but Brilliant. I spent months being angry about it, but then I realized you had every right to be ruthless with people who'd been ruthless to you. It was the closest thing to understanding I'd ever received from her. An unexpected outcome of my revenge was becoming a mentor to other women in similar situations. Word spread through social networks about the woman who turned family dismissal into family salvation, and I began receiving calls from wives and daughters-in-law dealing with their own versions of the Blackwood trouble. Sarah, a cardiac surgeon married to a man whose family owned a struggling restaurant chain, called after her mother-in-law publicly questioned whether she was too busy saving lives to save her marriage. I helped her restructure their business, debt and implement systems that tripled their profitability within 18 months. Amanda, a tech entrepreneur, reached out after her husband's family accused her of emasculating him with her startup success. Together, we developed an investment strategy that allowed her to buy out their failing family construction company and turn it into a profitable subsidiary of her tech firm. Each situation was different, but the pattern was familiar: successful women being diminished by families who felt threatened by their competence, then using that competence to demonstrate their true value in ways that couldn't be dismissed. I never charged for these consultations. Consider it my contribution to the sisterhood of underestimated women. 2 years after my Christmas Eve demonstration, William made an unexpected proposal. He wanted to formalize my consulting relationship with the vineyard by making me a partner, 30% equity. He offered during a family dinner, full partnership rights, decision-making authority, profit sharing. It's time we made this official. The offer was generous, more generous than I'd expected. 30% of a debt-free, profitable vineyard was worth considerably more than the $23 million I'd spent to save it. But I surprised everyone, including myself, by declining. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I don't want to be a vineyard owner. I want to be your consultant, your advisor, your family member who happens to be excellent at financial strategy. But this is your family legacy, not mine. Marcus looked confused. You could own part of something you helped build. I already own the most important part, I replied. Your respect? William nodded slowly. Counteroffer then, we'll pay your consulting fees, but we'll also establish a college fund for any future children you and Marcus have. The vineyard. We'll fund their education completely, undergraduate, graduate, whatever they choose. It was a gesture that acknowledged both my contribution and my place in the family's future. I accepted. Marcus and I had our first child, Eleanor, 3 years after the Christmas Eve incident. She was born into a family where her mother's professional. Achievements were celebrated rather than dismissed, where her intelligence and ambition would be nurtured by grandparents who'd learned the cost of underestimating capable women. Patricia doted on Eleanor, but more importantly, she talked to her about her mother's work with genuine pride. Your mama saved our vineyard, she'd tell baby Eleanor during feeding time. She's the smartest person in this family, William established. A tradition of giving Eleanor stock certificates for her birthday, small amounts, but enough to ensure she grew up understanding ownership, investment, and the importance of financial literacy. She's going to be formidable, he'd say, watching her with satisfaction. The vineyard thrived under our ongoing partnership. We expanded into event hosting, developed a wine club that shipped nationwide, and even launched a subsidiary selling Virginia-made artisan foods. Each success reinforced the wisdom of including me as an equal partner in family decisions. More importantly, Eleanor would never know what it felt like to have her worth questioned. Because of her gender or her achievements, she grew up in a family that had learned to value competence over convention, results over appearances. This past Thanksgiving marked 5 years since that terrible dinner where I was branded a freeloader. The family gathering was larger than ever, not just immediate family, but friends, business associates, and employees from the vineyard. The dining room that once witnessed my humiliation now showcased my portrait alongside the other family. Photos. William's toast was brief but meaningful. To family members who challenge us to be better, who save us from ourselves, and who prove that the best gifts come in unexpected packages. Everyone raised their glasses, but this time felt different. This wasn't about forgiveness or apology or even gratitude. It was about recognition. The kind of recognition I'd always deserved but had to buy with $23 million and some very strategic planning. After dinner, Marcus found me on the terrace, looking out over the vineyard that I'd saved and helped rebuild. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The way you handled everything?" I considered the question seriously. The financial cost, the emotional energy, the complexity of orchestrating such precise revenge, it had been expensive in every way that mattered. "No," I said finally. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is force them to see the truth they've been avoiding, even when it costs millions of dollars. Especially then, anyone can forgive cheaply, but expensive forgiveness? That makes people remember why they needed it in the first place." Marcus put his arm around me, and we stood together watching the sunset over the vines I'd saved and the legacy I'd helped secure. Eleanor was asleep in her grandmother's arms inside, surrounded by people who would never question her worth or dismiss her achievements. My revenge was complete, but more than that, it was constructive. I hadn't destroyed the Blackwoods. I'd rebuilt them into people who could recognize value in all its forms. I'd turned their dismissal into dependence, their contempt into gratitude, their humiliation of me into their salvation. And every time William introduces me as the financial expert who saved our vineyard, every time Patricia asks my opinion on important family matters, every time someone raises a toast to family members who step up when it matters most, I remember that the most perfect revenge isn't destruction, it's demonstration. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead. The Blackwoods learned that the woman they dismissed as a freeloader was actually their salvation, and now they live every day knowing they owe everything to the person they once called worthless. My story proves that sometimes love means forcing people to see the truth they've been avoiding. Even when it costs millions of dollars to make your point, the most expensive forgiveness is often the most valuable, because it ensures people remember why they needed it in the first place. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who refused to see it? Sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever, because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's demonstration, and sometimes saving someone who tried to diminish you is the most powerful victory of all.